Hey everybody, this is Kenny. Welcome back. It's been a minute. Had to take a little time off, but welcome back to the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is a podcast for middle managers who want to develop themselves, develop their teams, and improve their results. I got to talk to a phenomenal leader who has put a great perspective on some things that we have done for years and years and years, knowing that they were broke. So the CEO and co-founder at Onloop, Projjal Ghatak, joined me today, and he talked about how we should be doing feedback differently. And wait till you hear his perspective on it. Most importantly, make sure you go to his website, which will be in the notes. He also talked about performance management and how that has just been a burden for so many years. How do we flip the script on that? He's got some specific ways. He talked about building team culture and building hybrid teams, what the challenges are, etc. So much to take in a half hour, but boy, oh boy, you don't want to miss a second of this. Let's get at it.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is the podcast for middle managers who want to develop themselves, develop their teams, as well as improve their results. But this is going to be for all leaders out there today. I have a phenomenal leader. He's the CEO and co-founder at Onloop. Projjal Ghatak has joined me today, and I am so excited to talk to him because he did something that a lot of us think about doing and we don't do something because out of frustration, he saw some things that needed fixing in the leadership realm and he did something about it. So Projjal, hey, welcome first of all, man. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me, Kenny. It's good to be here.
Oh, it is great. Thank you so much for taking the time. Tell us first about your background and what led you to do what you are doing now.
Yeah. So I started my career in management consulting, and then went to business school at Stanford, did a couple of years in finance, and then worked a few years in tech at a company called Uber. And I think what has been the most consistent thread in my career is just realizing how important people are and sort of building teams are and developing people are, but the tools that leaders were given, and I was given specifically, left a lot to be desired. And frankly, I naively did not understand why. I just thought nobody had thought about something better. Turns out it's a lot more complicated than that. As an entrepreneur, you realize there's actually no new good idea. Everyone's thought about it before. And so it's often important to ask, why has this problem not been solved yet when it's such a big problem? Especially when it's a big problem, it begs the question even more. And so, I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I didn't grow up in an entrepreneur family. This is my first venture in many ways. I didn't have a lemonade stand in college. And I was brought up to do well in school, get a good job, move to the ranks, and go up the corporate ladder. So, I wasn't brought up for it, but I felt like I had a personal pain and a personal passion that felt big enough not to go solve.
Yeah. Wow. Awesome. So tell us, what were a couple of moments for you where the light bulb just went off and said, wait a second, we could do this a little bit better. And I think I can get some people together and we can do this a lot better.
Yeah, I think a pivotal moment was 2018 when I was told by Uber to go to the Philippines and run our Philippines business. And I sort of inherited a 50-person team and had to do calibrations and performance management and reviews on the team in 2 weeks' time. And in those 2 weeks, all that people did was write reviews. No work got done, nothing happened, and everything sort of took a backseat as people sat and wrote reviews. But despite these long ass paragraphs that people wrote, when we walked into the calibration room to decide who gets a bonus or who gets a promotion or how to stack rank people, we still made up stuff from memory, and it was entirely based on who was the most visible and who remembered what. And I'm like, here we have this like excruciatingly time consuming process that takes up so much time, yet at the same time doesn't yield any improvement in making better decisions and only makes people anxious for weeks. Everybody feels a sense of dread around them.
Yeah.
And is just riddled with bias. And I'm like, well, like on the other hand, like, you know, at Stanford Business School, all we spoke about for 2 years was feedback and how important feedback was. And we've sort of equated feedback with this process called performance management that everybody hates. And that's just such a disservice to the world, because we've gone and implemented something in a way that makes such a valuable thing hated. And people run away from goals and feedback because they think of performance management and annual planning. And those are terrible implementations of goals and feedback. And you know, I felt that we had to rethink how goals and feedback was done in organizations so that it's done in a way that people run towards it, not away from it.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Boy, oh boy, you're talking a language now that I'm sure everybody's ears have perked up, because you're right. And it's so funny how when it came to performance management, not only folks that were getting their reviews at this time, but folks that had to write them, like you said, you know,
Yeah.
and you're taking me back to where for a couple of weeks I did nothing but that. I ain't getting any other work done.
Correct.
You know? Let's start now with some specifics. Let's start with performance management. Well, maybe we should start with feedback first. So what were some of the things that you saw with feedback, and how has your company now flipped the script on that?
Yeah. So I think, you know, feedback is one of those things, again, that scares people, right? And it scares people for a variety of reasons, because again, there's a whole bunch of myths around feedback. So people assume feedback always equals telling someone else they suck. And that is how people think about feedback. But actually, there are four main types of feedback. There's self-feedback, which is often known as reflection, and there's feedback for others. And actually, often self-feedback is even more important than giving someone else feedback. And if we built a culture of super strong self-feedback in organizations, we'd have significant better organizations than we do today, even if we didn't give feedback to other people. That's number one. Number two is feedback can both be strengths-based feedback, which is called praise or celebrate or kudos, or you can use any language, or it can be improved feedback or constructive feedback or criticism, or how you might define it. And actually, strengths-based feedback is actually more important than constructive feedback. And people being able to really articulate what makes them good is significantly more important than them knowing what their blind spots are, what they can improve on.
Yeah.
And actually often when someone's doing a good job, managers have a tendency saying, you're doing great, and they move on. But when someone's not doing a good job, they belabor the point and tell them in excruciating detail what they're not doing well.
Right.
And actually telling someone they're doing a good job is equally terrible for the person as telling them, I'm frustrated with you, because they're both useless. You can't do anything with it.
Yeah.
And it's the specificity of the feedback that's very important, and being able to articulate what behaviors the person exhibited to then have the impact it did, good or bad, on people. And then the third is that people mistake and confuse the emotion behind a piece of feedback and the substance of a piece of feedback. And often people get so caught up on the emotion around it, be it anxiety or frustration or anger, depending on, you know, I do a feedback masterclass and I'm happy to go deep into that someday. Like if you're junior, you're more anxious about feedback. If you're senior, you're more angry with your feedback. But still
true.
often the emotion takes over and becomes more than the substance. And so often people use the term feed forward, which is a little bit, you know, it's a little bit kitschy, but makes sense. But really it's about articulating the behavior that a person can action on and move forward. And so, Kim Scott, who I've met and who wrote Radical Candor, talks about good feedback being direct and kind. And I both the directness and kindness are super important because ultimately you're trying to drive behavior change. And this is where we are very inspired about the role generative AI can play in feedback, in giving us sort of eloquent superpowers around it, because so much about feedback is having the right language, and often people just don't have that ability to have the right language around it, and we can go deeper there if we want to. But I one of the very core use cases in the workplace that is very ripe for generative AI usage is feedback, because feedback is ultimately about eloquence and converting raw observations to good feedback, and AI can really help people with that.
Wow. So much said there. And yeah, I do want you to go a little bit deeper. I want to ask this first, is it still a time thing? Because this just sounds like as a leader, I would want to do this. That's part of my question. And then do you also see, are leaders becoming better at behavioral observation? And what are some things that could help them be a little bit better? Because I think the better you are at that, you can give better feedback.
Yeah, listen, I think that companies often make the mistake of taking a person, making them a manager, giving them people manager responsibilities, but also then giving them the same amount of IC load that they have no time to manage. And so if any manager tells you, I don't have time to give my team feedback, fire that person.
Yeah.
That person's not a manager. The person could go back to being a great IC. Yeah. And that's great. Doesn't mean they're a bad performer or a bad asset to the firm. Right. They're not a good manager. Right. It's like a coach of a football team saying, I don't have time to call feedback on plays. That's your job, right? Like, you're supposed to observe, make observations, and provide suggestions on how to be better, right? And sort of any high performance endeavor, be it sports or theater, is about feedback. Now, I think that the performance management ritual has made people hate it.
Yes.
And I don't blame them. And I don't blame them for it. Right. And so what we try to do with our product is make that process as frictionless as possible. And essentially now what we can do with generative AI is we can take someone's stream of consciousness. So we can say something like, Sam is always late to meetings and it's really frustrating. And we can then convert that to very eloquent, direct, and kind feedback. And then based on a set of behavioral competencies, also extract the behaviors that are inferred from that piece of feedback. And so, and then we play that back to the manager. The manager can see it, edit it, and save it for themselves. They don't even have to share it with the person. They can just keep it for a future one-on-one or a future conversation. And so people do things when it gives them back 10x rewards for doing it, right? And actually, the fitness industry has been a great example to really build habits. When people can see how many steps they can take, or they see the readiness score or their recovery score on the Oura Ring or the Whoop Band go up because they didn't drink the previous night or slept well, that motivates behavior. Yeah. And so we have a similar concept called the Clarity Score in our app, and we can talk about our full framework of how we help managers, manage in a more, less anxious manner and a more methodical way of understanding what's happening with each person. And that Clarity Score is basically an amalgamation of what's happening with every team member and how a manager can help. And when they take a next action, it increases the Clarity Score. So if you take the moment to go celebrate someone, it increases the Clarity Score. If you take a moment to check in on someone's goals and unblock them, it increases the Clarity Score. If someone checks in that their well-being is low, and you go fix it by having a conversation, increase the clarity score. And so it allows the manager to sort of really understand what's going on with every team member, and then take the right appropriate next action depending on what's going on. Because if someone's mom passed away, giving that person constructive feedback is not going to do anything to them.
Right.
And so there's a natural hierarchy of what's going on with each person, and then how do you intervene to make things better. If someone's a super high performer, what they need is improvement feedback. If someone's overwhelmed, what they need is clarity on prioritization and what goals to focus on. And so we've come up with a hierarchy of needs that every sort of IT has from their manager, and that's well-being goals, celebrates, improves, and ongoing learning in that hierarchy. And our app helps managers sort of really figure out where to intervene depending on what's going on.
That is so awesome. And I'm blown away, by it. I've heard you talk about this, but now talking about it to you personally, this is just it's amazing and so well needed. Um, does this start to kill some of the time? Is this a big time savings? And how often should performance reviews be happening? We know feedback should happen consistently. How often should performance reviews actually happen?
Yeah, so what we really believe is in having the right conversation, right? So I think there are different reasons why you might have reviews, right? So we believe that it makes sense to have a developmental conversation around progress against goals, feedback, and skills about once a quarter, right?
Okay.
So and in our product, we develop something called Prism Summaries, which is an AI generated summary of what's happened in the course of that quarter with goals and feedback. And we deliver that, one for the individual, one for the manager to then have the conversation with. And actually, we really believe that the conversation is very important. Because people are so frustrated with performance management, companies are doing away with the ritual of the conversation, which is like throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
But the conversation's very important to have, which is going to take the chore away from doing all the paperwork around it. And then if you're making compensation decisions, then, and obviously the performance and the potential of the person obviously plays into that. That would probably happen every 6 months or every year. But I think having a structured quarterly check-in is very important.
Wow, that's awesome. Awesome. I want to kind of now take all that, and you really talk a lot about hybrid teams and how you take all of this now and use it for virtual folks or folks that are in the office a day or two a week. What are some big hints and tips that you can take all of what you just talked about and now really apply that to hybrid teams today?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue with hybrid is that body language is what I think nonverbal communication is 91% of communication.
Yep.
So the words you say is just 9%. I think tone, etc., is not a 40 something, and then like body language and posture, other things, the remaining 50%. And managers don't have all of those cues at the same level of intensity and frequency in a high world. And frankly, there's a reason why companies want people to come back to the office, because it is tougher to build culture. It is tougher to have people bond. Right. It is tougher to create a sense of belonging. There's a lot of fatigue around being on meetings all day, right? And so every interaction at the workplace becomes a meeting if you're a hybrid, versus a 10-minute catch up with a colleague is a hallway conversation in the office. And right. so in natural, that division between life and work is starker in some ways if you're at home. But one of the other reasons that hybrid's a problem is that we call it the productivity paranoia, is that managers don't get a sense of what's going on. And what they sort of got a sense of by walking the halls now needs to come through other ways. And so that's increased the number of meetings, has increased the number of update conversations, has increased the amount of form filling. And so building the right habits around goals and feedback prevent that bureaucracy from taking place, and sort of allowing people to have clarity and visibility of what's going on without all the form filling. And that's really what we are after, because if Onloop becomes one more form to fill, that kind of sucks. But if we can take what I call streams of consciousness and then convert that into the right structured output, that then provides that visibility, which I think is super important for managers to feel at ease that stuff's all moving in the right direction without the bureaucracy and the paperwork.
Yeah, that's just amazing, amazing advice. And I want to catch something you said there. You mentioned culture. And so what does all of this what does it do for the culture? What are some measuring things that leaders can take away if they've taken over, let's say, a culture that's toxic or something that not productive? What does this do, and how can leaders measure it?
Yeah, so essentially for us, we call ourselves a clarity app because we believe that clarity and collaboration are the currencies of a hybrid team productivity.
Mhm.
And so if a team is collaborating and if a team is clear, that means they hit business goals faster. They're less burnt out.
Mhm.
They are happier. They're more engaged, and they stay longer. Right.
Mhm.
So ultimately, and actually, one of the core tenets of our approach is we don't think we necessarily make HR's life easier. So we don't pitch to HR, we pitch to the business.
Mhm.
Because ultimately our job is to make every manager and their organization more productive.
Mhm.
And if we do our jobs right, that then helps companies do more with less. And there's
Mhm.
obviously a big efficiency focus in the economic environment we live in.
Mhm.
And if we have clarity on what each person is doing and how they're progressing and what their priorities are and where they're stuck and how they can be unblocked, that then drives the ability to do more with less.
Wow.
Um, and that's really what we are after. I think what we hear from our customers is that after using Onloop, they've been able to drive consistent development conversations without sort of people complaining and grumbling about it, which then makes every person feel like they're cared for and the organization cares about them because it lets those conversations happen much more ease. And they change sort of how they think about feedback. So instead of feedback being criticism, now guidance.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you don't do that service to your colleague, doing them more of a disservice than criticizing your colleagues and sort of making them feel less than, because it's a blind spot. They don't know their blind spot, and the only person who can show them a blind spot is you. And so because people are like, oh, it's not my place to give my colleague feedback. In fact, it is your
It
place
is.
because you're the only
Absolutely.
person who can help them. And so by not giving them the feedback, that's how you're harming them, not by giving it. And if we take the heaviness away from clunky tools and give people products that are joyful and delightful, it changes how they approach a particular topic. It's like Equinox is Equinox for a reason because people love going to Equinox. If you
Mhm.
had a moldy, smelly gym, you're going to have an obese population because nobody wants to work out. And
Exactly.
so if you want someone to like a subject matter, you got to make it fun and sexy at some level.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, I could talk to you all day. I feel like we just scratched the surface here. I want to say this. You have such a great combination, which is why I'm gonna ask you to really talk about how people can work with you. You have this great combination of this great technology, and but yet you are so good and so in tune to people. And so,
Mm.
between these two, how wonderful the advice that you gave today, man. I got to tell you, leaders have to wake up and use some of these tools that you're talking about now. And I want to give you some time to talk about that, but also don't lose that people aspect. That's what I
Mm.
felt from you when I heard you on a couple of podcasts, and I'm like, this guy knows people, man. you
Mm.
know, but yet, just this wonderful technology and combining both of them, I think it is the way to go today. And the business world is so tough out there, especially for the middle leaders that will be listening to this. Um,
Start that question again.
yeah. So, how can people work and connect with you? What are the best ways to find out more about what you do and connect with you?
Yeah, to find out more about what we do, onloop.com is the best resource. And to find me, I'm Projjal or PJ Ghatak on LinkedIn. And I read every LinkedIn message that comes to me. I may not respond to every LinkedIn message, but I do read every one of them. And so, feel free to reach out, and I'd love to hear from folks.
Awesome. I have a feeling that people are going to be reaching out, sir. This has been amazing. And I want to thank you so much for your time. I'll make sure all that's in the show notes so they can see it right there for those that, might be driving and didn't write this down. What an amazing company that you have started. God bless everything you're doing. And please, please, please continue to do it. It is so much needed. So thank you again for joining me today.
No, thank you. Thank you, Kenny. It was great to have you.
Awesome. So this has been Kenny and Projjal with the Leading from the Middle podcast. We will talk to you real soon.
All right. Have a good day. Do you want to